Welcome to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's public field hearing in Oklahoma at the Oklahoma City University Kerr-McGee Auditorium at the Minders School of Business. At today's field hearing, you will hear from Director Richard Cordray, Deputy Director Steve Antonakis, and a panel of distinguished experts who will discuss medical debt collection and credit reporting. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, is an independent federal agency whose mission is to help consumer finance markets work by making rules more effective, by consistently and fairly enforcing those rules, and by empowering consumers to take more control over their economic lives. My name is Zixta Martinez. I'm the Associate Director for External Affairs at the CFPB. Our audience today includes public officials, community leaders, advocates, industry representatives, and of course, consumers. We are especially pleased to have in the audience Mr. Tony Reel, Assistant Deputy Commissioner in the Oklahoma State Banking Commissioner's Office. We're delighted that you are here. Let me spend just a few minutes telling you what you can expect at today's field hearing. First, you'll hear from CFPB Director Cordray, who will provide remarks about medical debt collection and credit reporting. Then Deputy Director Steve Antonakis will moderate a panel discussion. Following the panel discussion, there will be an opportunity to hear from the public. Today's field hearing is being live streamed at consumerfinance.gov, and you can also follow CFPB on Twitter and Facebook. So let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce Richard Cordray. Prior to his current role as the CFPB's first director, he led the CFPB's enforcement office. Before that, he served on the front lines of consumer protection as Ohio's Attorney General. In this role, he recovered more than $2 billion for Ohio's retirees, investors, and business owners, and took major steps to help protect its consumers from fraudulent foreclosures and financial predators. Before serving as Attorney General, he also served as an Ohio State Representative, Ohio Treasurer, and Franklin County Treasurer. Director Cordray.
If lenders and other, there we go. Obviously, if well, I'll just let the LeBron James comments go unrecorded. So collection of consumer debt serves an important role in the proper function of consumer credit markets. Obviously, if lenders and other providers cannot get paid what they are owed, they cannot provide the kinds of products and services that consumers need to improve their lives. But certain debt collection practices have long been a source of frustration for many consumers. Debt collection is a top source of consumer complaints to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and to our sister agency, the Federal Trade Commission. From the millions of complaints that have been submitted over the years, we know that consumers are quite frustrated with how the debt collection system works. Consumers complain about being hounded by a collector for a debt they do not recognize and do not believe they owe. Others tell us frequently about their frustration in trying to get information about these debts or trying to explain that the collector is calling the wrong person. The problems with debt collection are magnified if the debt collector reports the debt as a collections trade item to the national credit reporting companies, can be magnified. Trade lines are individual consumer credit accounts, so one person will likely have multiple trade lines, such as her car loan, home mortgage, and each credit card. Either a severe delinquency or a collections trade line is a black mark. Some might say a scarlet letter on any credit report. It means the debt has gone to collections and generally indicates the consumer is so past due that the consumer is unable or unwilling to repay. Having a collections item or a severe delinquency on a credit report can affect a consumer's ability to borrow money. Sometimes affects the credit score by hundreds of points. And it can also increase any interest rate if they do manage to borrow money. Our national credit reporting system is enormous and enormously important. Roughly 220 million consumers have credit reports on file at the three largest credit reporting companies, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. Each year, approximately 36 billion updates are made to these files. More than 1.3 billion trade lines are actively reported. Collections trade lines are an important factor in the system. They affect roughly 1 out of 3 consumers who have credit reports, more than 70 million people in all. Medical debt is the type of debt that appears most frequently in collections trade lines on credit reports, and so it's the key focus of this field hearing. Later on, I will circle back to describe some of the significant changes we're making to improve the credit reporting market more generally. The white paper we're publishing today sheds light on the way medical debt is collected, and it describes how it can appear and disappear on consumer credit reports. What we discovered is that medical debt amplifies many of the problems generated by debt collection in the credit reporting system. When people fall ill and end up at the hospital with unexpected bills, far too often they've entered into a financial maze. To better explain the frustration that consumers face, let me tell you about Harold from Connecticut. About a year ago, Harold went to his regular doctor who used a new medical lab to run some blood tests. Despite having full health insurance and a health savings account to cover any out-of-pocket expenses, Harold got an unexpected bill from the lab. After going back and forth with his insurance company about this charge, does this sound familiar to anyone? Which he had never incurred before, he finally gave in and paid the bill out of pocket. Months later, Harold checked his credit report at each of the big 3 national credit reporting companies and discovered a medical collections item for the blood work in each company's report. Harold then had multiple exchanges with the debt collector where he presented proof of payment. The whole thing turned into an aggravating tangle of back and forth between the collections agency, the blood lab, and the insurance company. Every month, the debt collector continued to file entries for the same lab charge with all 3 credit reporting companies. Harold complained to us and called it a continuous and concerted harassment effort. Harold's story, unfortunately, is not unique. Today's study found that many consumers are affected by medical debt, that medical debt dominates collections trade lines in their credit reporting system, and that the appearance of medical debt information on credit reports can reflect the complexity, confusion, and delays that characterize medical billing and insurance reimbursement, rather than reflecting the consumer's ability or willingness to pay their debts. Our study found that 1 in 5 consumers with a credit report has a medical collections item, and about half of the overall debt collection trade lines are from medical bills at hospitals and other providers. 15 million consumers have medical debt collections items as the only collections items on their credit reports, and many of them have no other seriously delinquent accounts. Some of the large volume of medical debt on credit reports can be attributed to the process by which medical costs get billed. A patient who undergoes a medical treatment may receive bills from any number of providers. For example, a consumer who had 1 trip to the emergency room might receive 1 bill from the hospital, 1 from the ambulance company, 1 from the radiologist who read the x-rays, and possibly others as well. Each bill may be separately submitted to an insurance company, and each unpaid bill can turn into a separate collections item, meaning 1 medical incident alone can have an outsized impact on a consumer's credit report. Interestingly, most medical debts that end up on a consumer's credit profile are for small amounts, we found. The average is $579, and the median is just $207. By contrast, products like credit cards or student loans that become delinquent or are subject to debt collection efforts are usually for several $1,000s apiece. In May, we released a research report which found that consumers' credit scores were overly penalized for medical debt. Credit scoring models that weigh all collections accounts the same appear to underestimate the creditworthiness of consumers who owe medical debt in collections. Today's study reinforces this point. Most importantly, about half of those with only medical collections show no other evidence of financial distress and generally appear to be paying their other financial obligations on time. In other words, roughly 7 million people who are otherwise good-paying consumers may be treated as greater risks and have lower credit scores solely because of medical debt. If a credit score is supposed to be a predictor of a consumer's likelihood of paying back a debt, these findings raise serious questions about how medical debt collection items affect a consumer's credit score. Given the large role that medical debt plays in both debt collection and credit reporting, we want to make sure that consumers are fully empowered to make the best decisions for their financial lives. The complex and opaque processes around incurring, reporting, and collecting medical debt can create unnecessary and frustrating challenges for consumers. These challenges begin when consumers seek medical care. People rarely know the actual cost of a treatment or procedure beforehand, and after they receive treatment, it can be difficult to assess how much of the cost they will have to pay themselves. The amount can depend on whether the consumer has insurance and what and how much the insurance covers. The result is that even consumers with health coverage often receive medical bills that can be surprising and hard to understand. After the bill is due, hospitals, doctors, and other providers may hire third-party debt collectors with names the consumer does not recognize. Of course, this is also true for other types of debt, but medical collections are particularly fragmented, with the top 10 collectors accounting for only 18% of the market, compared with the top 10 banking collections companies that account for 87% of the market. And when a single medical incident can result in multiple bills, debts that are unpaid can get reported to the credit reporting companies from many sources. The debt collectors that furnish the vast majority of this information have only loose ties to the underlying debt for a fairly brief period. Since consumers have no choice about who collects from them, debt collectors have less incentive to treat them well than if the collectors had to compete for their business. The upshot is that consumers are frequently confused about their medical debt and not able to manage the situation effectively. If the process for incurring medical debt creates confusion, the process of reporting medical debt just compounds the uncertainty. Consumers have little insight into how a medical debt winds up on their credit report. In some industries, norms or even state regulations control when a delinquent account can be reported as a collections item. But medical debt has no standard time frame. A doctor's office or hospital may send a debt to collections as early as 30 days after billing, while others may wait up to 180 days. Nor is there any consistency about when a collector reports the overdue bill to the credit reporting companies as a black mark. Sometimes reporting happens rather quickly, sometimes the company takes a wait-and-see approach, sometimes the debt is never reported at all. It may seem illogical, but the companies that are the most removed from the actual transaction often have the greatest influence on how the debt affects the customer's life. The lack of consistent reporting practices, such as a standard minimum wait time, can cause consumers to be surprised by medical collections items showing up on their credit report. A consumer might be unaware of a charge, still be waiting to pay for a bill, or think that they have already paid. This creates a haphazard system for consumers. In addition, the state where a consumer lives also affects how much medical debt makes it onto her credit profile. Our study found that the range of consumers who have medical debt collections on their credit reports can vary considerably from state to state, from a low of only 4% of consumers in one state, but fully 32% of consumers in another state. There's no reason to think that this disparity reflects people's actual character or creditworthiness. Rather, it may have to do with variations in state laws, as well as agreements about billing practices, billing disclosures, collection practices, and credit reporting practices. Another factor that can contribute to consumers' confusion is the practice of parking debts on credit reports as a way to get consumers to pay. Rather than actively reaching out and collecting from the consumer, the debt collector simply posts a collections trade line to a credit report as a passive collections tactic. Collectors do this because they know that even the mere appearance of an overdue debt on a consumer's credit report can strongly motivate the consumer to engage with the collection agency to resolve the debt. Consumers may pay debts they do not believe they owe simply to clean up their credit report and qualify for some other source of credit. Medical debt tends to be for smaller amounts than loans that have gone delinquent. So collectors are less likely to take the trouble to make direct contact with the consumer in order to collect it. Neither providers nor debt collectors should report an item to the credit reporting companies without first having directly communicated with the consumer. This is viewed by some collectors as a way to minimize costs, but that's not how the system is supposed to work. And the collection process should not depend on harming consumers by adverse reporting before a consumer may even learn that she owes a medical debt. If it takes a drop in her credit score or an adverse action notice to make the point, then even more damage has been done to her financial standing. Instead, debt collectors need to give consumers a reasonable opportunity to learn about and pay their debts before they appear on their credit reports. The practice of parking debts may deprive consumers of that chance. Responsible consumers who normally pay their debts when they find out about them may be unduly punished by having their creditworthiness tarnished before they have a reasonable opportunity to meet the obligation. To help people through these situations, today we're putting out a consumer advisory with some basic principles on managing medical debt. We're recommending that consumers review their bills carefully and request itemized bills if necessary, especially if they need to check to see what their insurance covers. They should keep good, organized records of all bills. They should act quickly to resolve or dispute any final medical bills they receive. And if the medical debt has incorrectly shown up on their credit report, they should consider disputing it both with the furnisher of the information and with the credit reporting company. That brings me back to the broader issues involved in credit reporting. This process has an enormous influence over people's lives and a broad impact on our economy. Thus, we need to ensure that credit reports are working properly for consumers and creditors alike. These issues go well beyond just medical debt. So let me describe some of the important breakthroughs we've been making in this area over the past 2 years. The Consumer Bureau is the first federal government agency to supervise the larger players in both the credit reporting market and the debt collection market. We also supervise the larger lenders who furnish information on their customers' accounts, which also populate credit reports. This provides us with a unique perspective that allows us to play a positive role in identifying how consumers are affected by the interplay between the furnishers of information and the credit reporting companies. We've targeted substantial resources toward the issue of accuracy of consumer information, and we will continue to do so. To this end, one area of focus in our debt collector examinations has been on how collectors furnish information to the credit reporting companies in the first place. In turn, our credit reporting examinations have focused on how these companies vet and monitor their furnishers. And we've issued a bulletin spelling out the legal duty that all furnishers have to investigate credit reporting disputes. This is especially important because we've uncovered some impermissible barriers blocking consumers who seek to dispute errors in their reports. Let me be clear, it is essential that consumers have a full opportunity to correct their files. Using our supervision and enforcement authorities, we've already brought significant improvements to the credit reporting system, and we're only getting started. Credit reporting companies are now making investments to ensure that they're following the law. Some are doing this for the first time ever. We've also directed credit reporting companies to improve the way they handle consumer complaints. We've directed them to replace their outdated paper-based processes that often did not lead anywhere with modern online dispute processes that convey information appropriately to get a dispute resolved. And the credit reporting companies are building comprehensive quality assurance programs to provide feedback to each furnisher on the quality of its data. Some are now building programs to field test the accuracy of their reports. And we've required them to be data-driven in upgrading their processes for tracking disputes and complaints and resolving them in a timely manner. As part of our ongoing efforts to improve the credit reporting system, today we're announcing a major new development. We will now require the largest credit reporting companies to provide us with regular, standardized accuracy reports as part of our ongoing examinations about key risk areas for consumers. We posted the template for these regular reports today on our website. Most notably, these reports will specify the number of times consumers dispute information on their credit reports during that period. It will also list furnishers with the most disputes, industries with the most disputes, and furnishers with particularly high dispute rates relative to their peers. We will also see how those disputes get resolved. This is fundamental because disputes are an important indicator of risk. If a credit reporting company has a furnisher that continuously experiences an outsized rate of consumer disputes relative to its peers, we expect the company to do something about it. We expect it to investigate the source of the disputes, identify any problems, and take necessary action. This may include declining to accept information from the troubled furnisher when that step is justified. Access to this required reporting information on a regular basis will help us prioritize our work, and it will help us protect consumers even more effectively in this area. The white paper we put out today notes that the system of collecting people's medical debts and reporting their collection items introduces multiple points where error can creep into the system and harm consumers. So we will continue to maintain our intense focus on the accuracy of the credit reporting system, which the law specifies must achieve maximum possible accuracy. That's what the statute says. We're pleased to see the recent efforts that some in the industry are making to differentiate medical debt from non-medical collections when generating consumer credit scores. Consistent with the research we've made public, this improves the true predictive quality of credit scores. We support the Internal Revenue Service's recent proposal that, among other things, requires nonprofit hospitals to give the consumer 120 days before beginning extraordinary debt collection methods, including reporting medical debts as collection items to credit reporting agencies. In our view, consumers would benefit if for-profit hospitals and all other medical providers adopted the same approach. So we're working hard to make a difference on these important issues for consumers. We also applaud a number of state attorneys general who are pursuing their own investigations of credit reporting practices and developing further ideas about changes that will benefit consumers. Together, we can put consumers first and make sure they're treated fairly in this difficult area where debt collection meets credit reporting. As for medical debt in particular, the basic principle is that getting medical care should not make your credit report sick. As William Osler, a founder of modern medicine, once observed, soap and water and common sense are the best disinfectants. We can and we will make it a point to apply more common sense to improve life for consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Cordray. At this time, I'd like to invite the panelists to please take the stage, and while they are doing so, I'll briefly introduce the CFPB staff members and guest panelists who will participate in today's discussion. Steve Antonakis serves as the Deputy Director, as well as the Associate Director for Supervision, Enforcement, and Fair Lending at the CFPB. He is responsible for the supervision of all banks and non-banks under CFPB's jurisdiction and the enforcement of federal consumer protection and fair lending laws. We also have with us Corey Stone, who is the CFPB's Assistant Director for the Office of Deposits, Cash, Collections, and Reporting Markets. And we have Cheryl Parker Rose, the CFPB's Assistant Director for the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Our guest panelists, starting on my far left, include Lisa Stifler, Policy Counsel with the Center for Responsible Lending, Mark Rukavina, Principal, Community Health Advisors, LLC, Blake Hudson, Senior Associate, Consumers Union, Jim Wayman, Executive Vice President with Scores FICO, James Landman, Director of Healthcare Finance Policy, and Tom Gavinsky, Vice President of IC System, Inc. Deputy Director Antonakis, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Zixta. And good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to moderate our panel discussion. In today's financial world, credit reporting plays a critical part in the everyday lives of consumers. What is reported and how it is reported can have a direct effect on an individual's ability to get credit, be hired for a job, get insurance, or even be approved for a rental home. Tens of thousands of credit grantors, including retailers, credit card issuers, banks, finance companies, and credit unions, send updates to each of the 3 nationwide credit reporting agencies and other credit bureaus, usually once a month. We'll be discussing today how medical debt can amplify the problems we're hearing about both with debt collection and the credit reporting system. We will look particularly at the uniqueness of medical collections, how it occurs, how it is reported, how it affects credit scoring, and how it affects consumers' lives. Specifically, we'll examine the often complex and opaque processes around acquiring, reporting, and collecting medical debt and challenges that this can create for consumers. Now, the credit reporting system is voluntary, but participating requires compliance with established federal consumer financial protection laws. Credit reporters, known as furnishers, generally have a vested interest in providing the most current and accurate information because they're also users of the system providing credit products to consumers. The credit reporting system enables these users to offer products and terms based on the consumer's history and their record. We'll be discussing today what happens when furnishers do not have the same vested interest as credit providers. In particular, we'll discuss how collection agencies can leverage the credit reporting system as a tactical tool to get paid. We'll look particularly at the uniqueness of medical collections, how it occurs, how it is reported, how it affects credit scoring in consumers' lives. Our panel today represents experts from the collection industry, trade associations, and credit score providers, along with consumer advocacy organizations. Now, each of our distinguished 6 panelists will offer some brief opening remarks. From there, Cheryl Parker Rose to my right, Corey Stone to my left, and myself will ask questions of our panelists. I'd like to begin with Lisa Stifler from the Center for Responsible Lending. Lisa?
Good morning, and thank you to Director Cordray and the CFPB for holding this hearing today and for inviting me here to speak with you all. The Center for Responsible Lending is a research and policy organization. Sorry, that was not on. The Center for Responsible Lending is a research and policy organization dedicated to protecting homeownership and family wealth by working to eliminate abusive financial practices. Debt collection, including medical debt collection, concerns us due to unfair and abusive practices in the market that can take advantage of financially distressed consumers and unfairly strip families of wealth. As we heard from Director Cordray, in some ways medical debt is distinct from other forms of consumer debt. It arises from unique circumstances and involves a complex set of factors typically beyond an individual's control. We've also heard briefly about the distinct lack of standards for when a bill is sent to a debt collector or reported to a credit reporting agency. These distinctions can result in unique harms to individuals in the credit reporting context. They can also result in individuals being wrongly pursued for debts they do not owe or for incorrect amounts due to billing or insurance disputes. On the other hand, some of the abuses prevalent across the debt collection industry are also found within medical debt collection. Since July of last year, more complaints have been filed with the CFPB about debt collection than any other type of financial product or service, comprising more than 1 out of every 3 complaints. More than 5,000 complaints have been filed on medical debt alone, reflecting many of the same problems individuals face with collection for other debts. Of particular concern to us is the sale and purchase of old consumer debts, including medical debts. Debt buyers purchase these debts at a steep discount, often pennies on the dollar, and then attempt to collect the debt themselves. Debts are often sold with limited or inaccurate or incomplete information about the consumers and the debts. This, along with any collection tactics used, results in people being harassed and wrongly pursued for debts they don't know, have already paid, or are too old to be subject to a lawsuit. Some debt buyers are also operating as lawsuit factories, clogging the courts on the debts they purchase, often resulting in garnished wages and other financial harms to individuals. Medical debts are the second most common type of debt purchased by debt buyers, comprising almost 1/3 of all debts purchased. As the sale of credit card debts have dropped in recent years, debt buyers are looking to other forms of debt to purchase, including medical debt. Although debt collection plays an important role in the functioning of the U.S. economy, it may also expose American households to unnecessary abuses. Such abusive practices have no place in our healthcare and credit markets. As more Americans are likely to face medical debt collection in coming years, it is critical that safeguards are in place to ensure that they do not face abusive collection practices that undermine their financial stability or their ability to build assets for the future. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Mark?
Good morning. I want to thank Director Cordray and the CFPB for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. And I applaud the Bureau for all that you do to assist American consumers in financial markets, and specifically today, for shining a light on medical collections. This hearing is timely since just last week we learned that as a nation we spent $2.9 trillion on health care in 2013, and of that, $339 billion was spent on out-of-pocket costs in the forms of deductibles, co-payments, and co-insurance. And this is over and above the cost of insurance premiums that American families pay. These out-of-pocket costs represent 339 billion ways in which medical collections might ruin one's credit. Your research has found that medical collections are on the reports of 43 million Americans. 15 million Americans have only medical collections on their credit reports. Half of these consumers have otherwise clean credit. They have no serious delinquencies and show no other signs of financial distress. Interestingly, other research estimates that about 7 million Americans were contacted by collection agencies because of medical billing errors. Medical collections are unique. They result from bills that are unpredictable, typically unplanned, and involuntarily incurred in emotionally charged situations. Sometimes people are even unconscious when they incur these bills. This is far different from planned purchases of consumer goods and services. And medical billing errors, as many of us know, are quite common. It's unfair for someone who has had his or her life upturned by a frightening medical diagnosis to then have their credit ruined by medical bills that have been sent to collection inappropriately and reported to the bureaus. Medical billing lacks transparency. A recent study found that more than half of Americans were confused by their medical bills. I'm surprised it wasn't even greater than that. With the growth of high-deductible health plans, different rates paid for providers that are out of network, and the alphabet soup of PPOs and HMOs, this isn't surprising. Patients are unsure whether they or their insurance company should pay the claim. Due to confusion, people often wait for their medical claims to be adjudicated before paying them. They take time, and during that time, patients' bills may be sent to collection. Some patients first learn of their out-of-pocket obligations from collection agencies. Many have no recollection of being warned that these bills would be handed over to a collector. But unfortunately, at this point, the damage has been done. Even if they pay these bills promptly, they're later surprised as these trade lines linger on credit reports, making loans more expensive. It's unfair to ding people's credit, especially those who've paid their medical bills because of an inefficient healthcare billing system. Your report states that there's no uniformity regarding medical collections. In some states, healthcare providers and their collectors are prohibited or discouraged from reporting to the bureaus. There's no clear standard for when a bill is deemed delinquent. This asymmetrical reporting and the lack of uniform standards on delinquency raise real concerns regarding the integrity of medical collection data. Fortunately, the industry is responding. For example, the Healthcare Financial Management Association, we'll be hearing from them in a minute, recently developed best practices for resolving medical debt. But now we await broad adoption of these practices. In closing, I want to encourage the Bureau to continue research on medical collections. If there is to be fairness in financial markets, this type of work is critical. I also applaud your new initiative requiring the national credit reporting agencies to provide regular reports on disputes filed with them. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. Next up, Blake Hudson from Consumers Union.
Yeah, Blake Hudson for Consumers Union. We're the Policy and Advocacy Division of Consumer Reports. In addition to rating dishwashers, we also do a lot of lobbying and policy work. Thanks for having us here today. We applaud the CFPB and Director Cordray for focusing on medical debt. We have a history of working on consumer issues and hearing directly from consumers. Two of those big issues are financial protection and health insurance reform. These kind of marry together with the medical debt issue. For those in the unfortunate situation they not have any health insurance, medical care can cause them not to seek care, and if they do seek care, to face enormous bills that frequently end up ruining their credit. However, people with insurance too often face high costs as well. When the healthcare system works well, consumers are covered by insurance plans, they have a clear understanding of their insurance policy and of their cost-sharing obligations, and when they need care, be it emergency care or routine care, they can go to a provider that accepts their insurance and their financial liability is limited. The Affordable Care Act actually brings us closer to a system that works in this way, with more consumers getting coverage every day, and most of those new enrollees getting help with the cost of coverage. However, there continues to be a widespread breakdown and challenges in the way our healthcare system plays out for consumers. Health insurance products are increasingly expensive. I had a consumer write into me recently, and she said, I can understand my premium, I can understand my deductible and my copays, but for the life of me, I don't get the concept of co-insurance. I thought I had insurance. Consumer education doesn't solve all of our problems, though. We regularly see consumers covered by health insurance become the victim of billing disputes between providers and insurers. Simply put, when an insurer and a doctor can't agree on a price, in many cases, that doctor will go back to the consumer to collect as much additional as possible. This is a big opportunity for medical debt. At Consumers Union, we're trying to put an end to these surprise bills by pushing for new state laws that force insurers and doctors and hospitals to work it out and not dump this cost onto consumers. But more often than not, even when there are protections, consumers aren't aware. And when consumers do fight back, there's no guarantee that their credit won't be damaged in the process. I had another person write into me recently. She had an in-network hospital visit that resulted in a surprise bill. She wrote, come to find out, while the anesthesiology practice was listed as accepting my insurance, not all members of its practice did. After many calls and letters, I was finally able to persuade my insurance company to cover the bill, but not before my credit had been damaged. These breakdowns in the system happen all the time, and we need good protections against them. But at a minimum, as a starting point, consumers should have a shot at making their case against these surprise bills before debt collectors come calling and they risk damage to their credit report. We applaud today's announcement by the CFPB. We hope to see some further improvements. Director Cordray talked about requiring medical providers to give consumers a period of time before the debt is turned over to a debt collector or referred to a credit reporting agency. We're excited about that concept. We'd like to see that widespread. And we'd also like to see that when medical debt is paid or settled, it's immediately removed from a consumer's credit report. That seems fair. Consumers need robust protections to ensure accurate and fair treatment so healthcare needs and medical emergencies don't haunt them for the years to come. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Blake. Next, we'll hear from Jim Wayman at FICO.
Director Cordray and members of the CFPB staff, I too want to thank you for the invitation to join you here today. I'm pleased to participate in this important discussion on medical collections. You know, while I know I'm here at the invitation of the CFPB, I'm also pretty sure that we wouldn't be here without the long-standing support of the nation's lenders. Thousands of organizations, from small-town community banks to the nation's largest lending institutions, rely on the FICO score to determine if and on what terms consumers get access to credit cards, mortgages, auto loans, and other consumer credit products. I'm told among all the factors, it's one of the most important. So with that comes a big responsibility to get it right. And I'm grateful and want to thank the nation's lenders for their confidence and trust. You know, I don't want to let this moment pass without also thanking our partners, the 3 national credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. They do the hard work of collecting and organizing the data we use to build the FICO score and that lenders use to calculate a FICO score in a credit risk management decision. You know, at FICO, we invented behavioral scoring and 25 years ago introduced the FICO score. It had a big impact. It made lending more fair by moving credit decisions away from subjective criteria and toward objective criteria. It also had a big impact on efficiency and scale, allowing for more competitive and cost-efficient distribution of consumer credit. You know, it was such a big leap forward and a big game changer that it was widely and voluntarily adopted by lenders, investors, rating agencies, auto dealers, mortgage brokers, and many other stakeholders. We all continue to benefit from the FICO score standard, which gets me back to today's topic, medical collections. Our research confirms what Director Cordray said. Millions of consumers have medical collections on their credit report. This is an issue that can impact any of us. And so we wanted to do our part. We set out 2 years ago, knowing that we had a collection of existing FICO score models that were very, very good. But we wanted to do better. And we have succeeded. FICO Score 9 that we recently announced is the most predictive FICO score that we've ever built. And it also has several other significant enhancements, especially in the area of collections. For the first time, it completely ignores paid collections in the FICO score model, and it continues our history of excluding de minimis or low volume, low dollar collections as well. And also, importantly, it decreases and reduces the impact of medical collections in the model as well. So we're very pleased that this is going to have an important and positive impact on consumers as it gets adopted by the nation's lenders. We look forward to studying and reading the research report published by the CFPB today. We think it can only enhance and add to the considerable research that FICO's done in the area of medical collections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Next, we're going to hear from James Landman, who's with the Healthcare Financial Management Association.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cordray, and members of the CFPB staff. So just a quick note about the Healthcare Financial Management Association, or HFMA. We're an individual member association of more than 40,000 members. Our members are healthcare financial professionals in settings across the industry. So they're in hospitals and health systems, physician practices, health insurance companies, consulting firms, vendor companies, et cetera. We are a nonpartisan, non-lobbying association, and this, combined with our member representation across different healthcare settings, has enabled us to serve as a convener of various stakeholders when issues are facing the industry. I just wanted to give a couple comments on the current environment regarding medical debt. I think the good news is that, especially in the states that have decided to expand Medicaid coverage under the Affordable Care Act, the risk of catastrophic medical bills for patients and of uncompensated care to healthcare providers is being mitigated. The more ambivalent news is that in both employer-sponsored insurance and plans purchased through the state-sponsored and federally facilitated marketplaces, consumers are often facing significant exposure to deductibles, out-of-pocket maximums, and out-of-network bills. On employer-sponsored insurance, data from the Kaiser Family Foundation indicates that the percentage of covered workers with a deductible of $1,000 or more has increased from 10% in 2006 to 38% in 2013. And in smaller firms, those with less than 200 workers, that percentage has grown to 58%. In the insurance marketplaces, approximately 63% of enrollees, this is in the first year of enrollment, chose silver plans, which is followed fairly distantly by 18% at bronze, and then the remaining percentage is divided up among gold, platinum, and a very slim number of catastrophic plans. So if we look at the majority of enrollees in the silver plans, they're facing individual deductibles of approximately $3,000 and a $6,000 deductible for families, and the out-of-pocket maximum when you take in coinsurance obligations roughly doubles that number. And obviously that's a very significant number for most households in this country. I'd also want to make a quick note on the popularity of limited or narrow network products, particularly in the state and federal marketplaces, which raise the prospect of significant out-of-network bills if consumers do not fully understand the trade-offs that they're making in terms of limits on provider choice for lower monthly premiums. Out-of-pocket maximums for marketplace products apply only to in-network care. They do not apply to out-of-network fees. So that's a big issue out there. And then on the provider side, data that HFMA has received on provider collection rates indicate that these rates fall significantly, regardless of patient income levels, at amounts well below the out-of-pocket maximums in either employer-sponsored or marketplace purchase plans. So if we look at just a higher income level, above 400% of the federal poverty level, the collection rate after 360 days on balances less than $250 is just under 60%. If we look on balances exceeding $500, the collection rate again after 360 days drops from that 60% to under 25%. So medical debt obviously is an issue for both the consumer and the provider organization, and an increasingly significant issue. So what are we doing as an industry? So beginning in 2013, HFMA convened a series of task forces to address what we see as a three-legged stool: price transparency, patient financial communications, and medical debt. The findings, recommendations, and best practices that were identified by these task forces have been combined in an initiative that we are calling Healthcare Dollars and Cents. And although much of the material produced by the task forces is geared towards provider organizations, payers, and employers, the ultimate intent of the initiative is to benefit healthcare consumers by giving them a clearer sense of their potential financial responsibilities and the financial resources that may be available to them. So to that end, we've identified a set of consumer-focused principles that we think underlies the initiative as a whole. These include the need for consumers to be treated with respect in all healthcare financial transactions. When they visit a hospital emergency department, they have the right to receive treatment for any emergency conditions they may have, regardless of ability to pay. They should be able to request and receive a price estimate for healthcare services that are scheduled in advance. Obviously, there's a significant difference with price transparency between emergent and non-emergent care. They should be able to know what is and is not included in a price estimate. They have the right to know about financial assistance provided by a hospital, which includes discounted or free hospital care to those who are eligible. When they receive a bill, they have the right to question a charge, which they believe has been made in error. They share with the hospital the responsibility for working together to reach an agreement about the best way to resolve the bill. If they have an unpaid hospital bill and seek additional care from the same hospital, they have the right to receive care for any emergency medical conditions they may have, regardless of ability to pay current or previous bills. They should be informed in advance if certain actions to collect an unpaid bill will be taken. And throughout their interactions with hospitals, doctors, and other providers, they have the right to receive financial information to help them make good decisions about their health care. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, James. Tom Gavinsky from IC System, Inc. will give our last set of opening remarks. Tom?
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the CFPB for the opportunity here to present. And greetings from the great state of Minnesota. Actually, I didn't know all three of us are from Minnesota, just happens to be. And
We're the North Star table.
I'm not sure we knew we were the hotbed of medical debt collection in Minnesota, or either that or we just wanted to get away from the cold weather, the balmy weather here. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm wearing several hats here, actually. I work for a company, IC System. It's a debt collection company based out of St. Paul. We're a larger entity. We have about 600 employees. It's a family-owned business, been around for over 75 years, very long-standing organization. I also sit on the board of directors of ACA International, which is the trade association of debt collectors, about 6,000 members across the country. So I also wear that hat. I spent 20 years on the provider side as VP of Revenue Cycle for 2 large healthcare providers in the Midwest. So I have a pretty good handle on what the issues are from a healthcare provider standpoint. And I also am a consumer of healthcare, so I certainly understand some of the consumer issues as I experience them myself in our complex environment. So again, we appreciate the opportunity here to be viewed really as a part of the solution and not a part of the problem. And so I think this is a great venue to certainly promote that philosophy. And we certainly, as a association and as a company, want to assist consumers with their medical debt issues. It's complex, as was discussed earlier. Our fee-for-service system is what we have in place, and we're not going to change that today. But over time, that whole system may evolve. I actually had the personal opportunity to sit on the HFMA Medical Debt Task Force along with Mr. Ruckovina and 13 others, where we did try to define best practices for medical debt collection, and we took about a year. 15 of us sat down and hammered that out from various perspectives, from the collection outsourcer to the consumer groups to healthcare providers, data collection companies, and credit reporting. So it's a very comprehensive report that HFMA has published and ACA International has supported. So with that, 3 points on medical debt. One, there's more of it, and that's nothing new. We all know of that. There's more and more patient responsibility, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, example for myself, when I moved to Minneapolis, worked for Sears Roebuck, my health plan cost me $5 a month, and everything was covered in a group HMO, which HMOs were very popular back then. My company just came out with our open enrollment, and I now have a $6,000 deductible, and they put us on an HSA plan with higher co-insurance and deductibles and co-pays. So that is kind of the reality of the situation. There's going to be more and more patient responsibility in healthcare. It's becoming more complex. So we have the bronze plans, the silver plans, the gold plans, the platinum plans. And if you've ever seen some of the spreadsheets on those as to what the responsibility and co-pays are, it's very, very complicated. So we've made it a more complex process. Deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance, as we were talking about, in-network, preventative care, what's covered, what's not, prescription reimbursement, all becomes very, very complicated. And it's important for people to really understand what their coverage is. I recently had a procedure. It was preventative. Unfortunately, I found out that the lab that goes and associated with that is got a co-insurance, so I got a bill, and I question that. But that's, again, the reality of the putting the responsibility more and more for payment upon the patient in our current environment. The last comment is healthcare providers face serious financial challenges. Their reimbursements are declining, their uncompensated care is growing, and their margins are actually deteriorating. And I wanted to share a comment by Moody's that was just published, their outlook for healthcare. They issued a negative outlook on U.S. Nonprofit hospitals in 2015. They predict cash flow to weaken, revenue growth to be limited, and operating margins to narrow over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a real challenge for hospitals to produce acceptable margins, and they have to collect all revenue that's really due and owing for the organization. So it's a challenge to balance that, obviously, with the issues that the consumers face. With that, I want to thank you again, and again, we appreciate being a part of the solution.
Thank you, Tom, very much. So we'll now transition into the question and answer portion of the panel. I'll begin with a question for Blake. Blake, you spoke to this earlier, but could you expand upon, in your views, the consumer's experience with regard to medical debt collection?
I think the overarching theme we get from consumers is just really shock and surprised by this, particularly when it's an insured person. People generally think that their insurance is going to cover them. And so, like your experience, Tom, with the lab, when consumers go into an emergency situation or even just routine care, they generally think that they understand their insurance is going to cover them. And so then we see a lot of frustration at the insurance companies, which is sometimes warranted and sometimes it's not. Sometimes we see doctors' billing practices and collection practices that are just really kind of run amok, and unwillingness to meet a fair price and negotiate a fair price. We're seeing a trend towards limited networks. It's a real concern for consumers, and there's a lot of concern there. We see that consumers have a lot of trouble finding recourse. Even when it exists, they don't know how to access it. For example, I'm from Texas. The Texas Department of Insurance, in some cases, will actually help you work with your insurance company and your provider. But the form you fill out is the same form you fill out for complaints against auto insurance companies and homeowners insurance, and it's very long. The part you really need to fill out is real small, but it's confusing for a consumer. We need to make those things easier. We need to do more education, I think, but we certainly need to make it easier and kind of put a stop to some of these practices.
Jim, I have a question for you. What have you found with respect to medical debt, and how have you factored those findings into your analysis of consumer credit worthiness?
Yeah, thank you. This is a good question, and it's a little bit of an involved answer. It can get technical really quickly, and I'll try to keep it at a high level as much for myself. I'm not a data scientist or a model builder, and as much as to make it accessible to everybody. But it's important to remember, just to kind of level set, that at FICO we don't make the loan. We don't organize and manage the data, and we don't set policy. We're focused on the one core thing, and that's building the best possible credit score. And as we think about our role and responsibility, I got to say that our number one commitment is and focus is to the safety and soundness of the consumer credit system. So while we didn't specifically set out to adjust our treatment of medical collections, as we were thinking about rebuilding the FICO score, we did know that there was a changing landscape in collections, and so we made sure that we spent extra time, effort, and resources on agency collection accounts. And so what happened when we first started the research is we recognized and understood pretty early that medical collections actually do have a lower risk or lower predictive risk than non-medical collections. And this was a kind of a breakthrough insight. Now, that's not to say that it's not predictive at all. In fact, we see that consumers who do have a medical collection on their credit bureau file do have a much higher risk of default than consumers, all things being equal, who don't have a medical collection on their file. So the most important thing that we did is that we designed our model development process, which is a series of sophisticated mathematical steps, to make sure that that process would isolate and identify and separate, if you will, medical collections from non-medical collections, again, for the very first time. And this data-driven, empirically based approach is really the most effective way to determine to the extent any variable, and especially medical collections, should be included in the model. After that, we ran a series of exercises where we began to build the model, and the results quite clearly showed that we could actually improve the predictiveness of the FICO score model by lowering the impact of medical collections as a factor in the model. And this, again, when we got pretty excited, of course, when we fully realized that we were in a spot where we could actually improve the performance of the FICO score and increase the FICO scores of consumers with medical debt. In fact, you can't build to build the most predictive model, you have to treat medical collections this way. So we're proud of the impact that FICO Score 9 will have in the marketplace. For lenders, because it's more predictive, it's going to have a net shift of millions of consumers into higher FICO, lower risk FICO score ranges, and this can help lenders grant more credit at no greater risk. And for consumers, if you're a consumer who has a medical collection as your only negative item, the median FICO score increase will be 25 points. If you're a consumer whose only negative item is a paid medical collection, the impact can be much greater, up to 100 points. And so, depending on where you're starting from, this can impact your ability to get approved for credit or maybe the rate you pay for credit. So we're excited about the impact as FICO Score 9 gets rolled out, the positive and strong impact that it'll have for consumers.
Let me pose a question to Mark. Mark, you talked generally about the problems with the medical billing and collection system. Can you give some more color on that and the specific challenges that are associated with medical billing and insurance reimbursement?
Sure. Thanks, Corey, for the question and the opportunity to kind of expand on that. I think, first of all, there's, as has been mentioned previously, there's in general a lack of transparency around healthcare pricing. I mean, I can't think of another setting where we go in and access goods or services and not have any idea what it's going to cost. And as more and more people have high deductible health plans and more first dollar exposure for their healthcare costs, I think it's going to be important for the industry to respond and to do a better job of providing more information in terms of prices. The structure of insurance itself is complex. We heard some of this earlier. Deductibles, many people have some experience with deductibles in their auto insurance, for example. Co-payments, that's fairly straightforward. When you get into co-insurance, it's very confusing. And then when you introduce in-network and out-of-network providers to co-insurance, even more so. And the interesting thing about some of the language to explain this is it's straightforward and simple. So you think of something like an out-of-pocket maximum. You would think that's the maximum amount of exposure I'm going to have if I get sick. Well, that's not the case. So with out-of-network costs, for example, those are typically not included, as Jim mentioned, in out-of-pocket maximum. So again, consumers are in for a big surprise if they have high bills. I think of an insurance explanation of benefit form as the perfect definition of an oxymoron. I don't know about you, but for me it doesn't explain much. So that's kind of the setting. Consumers then are not fully informed of what they're going to be expected to pay and the time frame in which they're expected to pay it, and what actions might be taken if they don't pay the bill within that time frame. So that's where the CFPB comes in. That confusion leads to problems on one's credit report and a problem with one's credit score. So I know the CFPB can't fix the insurance billing system. I wish it could, but it can't. It's not your jurisdiction. Better pricing information for healthcare is probably beyond your jurisdiction as well. But ensuring that people are informed of what they owe and what will happen if they don't pay, and I think that brings us closer to the area that the Bureau is focused on. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. James, Could you describe some of the best practices that have been discussed that you've identified to alleviate payments problems?
Yeah. So we believe that communication and education at the point of care are really key to preventing payment problems down the road for patients. So recognizing that some of the best practices that we are calling for across these three initiatives I described are, first, identifying patients who may qualify for government programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP early on and assisting them with applications for those programs. Identifying patients who may be eligible for coverages through the health insurance exchanges or other avenues and assisting them with the application process. Proactively asking patients if they would like information about the hospital's financial assistance program and making that information conveniently and publicly accessible. In conjunction with payers, because this does have to, because of all the complexities we've been discussing, has to go hand in hand. So in conjunction with payers, providing estimates of a patient's out-of-pocket responsibility and specifying what is and isn't included in those estimates to minimize billing surprises. And I have to say, reflecting back on the task force's work, I think one of the hardest issues that's still confronting us is the whole problem of out-of-network billing. And you certainly, there are stories reported in the news of people who even, they have an emergency situation, they take care to go to a in-network hospital emergency department, but the emergency physicians might be contracted, might not actually be within network. So that's a huge issue, and it's something that, when we brought up the task force across the board, and we had health systems, physician practices, payers, employers, consumer advocates, and actual patient, everybody's like, that's a big issue. It was really one of the pieces that we identified going forward out of the report that we really need to, it's kind of one of those outstanding 800-pound gorillas in the room that we really need to figure out. And then proactively asking patients if they would like information about payment options, including extended payment options.
So I want to direct a question for Lisa. What are your thoughts about how medical debt collection practices can be improved?
Thanks, Corey. I think there have been a good number of suggestions made already today. I think some of the FICO and HFMA policies and programs are helpful, and the announcement this morning of what the CFPB is doing with credit reporting agencies, I think those are really good steps in the right direction. I think maybe 2 or 3 more recommendations that we believe are critical to improvement of debt collection generally and medical debt collection as well. So on the general perspective, I think one thing that would have a significant and positive influence on medical debt collection practices is sort of increase information and documentation that flows in the debt collection market. Each time a debt is sent to a collector, there's the potential for information to go missing or to be altered or somehow changed. I kind of like to talk about it as the game of telephone that we may have played as kids. As things get passed down, things get lost and altered because you hear it differently, you view it differently. And so I think some more oversight needs to be brought to the information flow between and among debt collectors and creditors and debt buyers as well. And I think there's a really good role here for the CFPB and other regulators to require increased and accurate documentation and information for the debts when they're sold and transferred, including information needed to verify and substantiate a debt, evidence needed to support any lawsuits, and then other information about the individuals being pursued so that the right person is being contacted. Specifically to medical debt collections, I think this has been mentioned, but this idea of a wait period is really important. When medical providers and collectors should refrain from engaging in collection activities and reporting to credit reporting agencies. Bills shouldn't be sent to collections before it's determined that no one other than that individual is liable. It can sometimes take months to resolve a billing dispute or an insurance dispute. I know in my personal situation, I've had 2 premature kids and had tens of thousands of dollars of bills. And with my first daughter, I caused an audit on our account because there were so many disputes, and it lasted over probably a good 6, 7, 8-month period between health problems of my daughter and myself and billing problems that came from that. It also can take time for individuals to be determined eligible for various government health programs and charity care. So while that is happening, a bill should not be sent to collections or reported to an agency. And there are precedent for this, the HFMA standards, the proposed IRS regulations. I think it's also even similar to the prohibition against so-called dual tracking in the foreclosure context, that as someone's trying to modify a loan, certain foreclosure activities cannot proceed. So it's a very similar, I think, context. And then finally, briefly was mentioned the idea of parking as a tool for debt collection. Don't believe that parking purely to collect on a debt, parking a debt purely to collect on it without doing more is fair, because it leaves to the consumer, it gets the consumer's attention, but in the process, their credit has been dinged and their ability to potentially get good credit or get a job or employment or that sort of housing has been affected. And then it's up to a consumer, especially in medical billing situations, if that's a wrong, there's a dispute and it's a wrongful debt, they've been harmed and it's up to them to right the wrong. And I think the burden needs to be on the front end so the consumer is not harmed going forward.
Tom, a question for you. We've heard a fair amount this morning about the complexity of deciphering healthcare costs and medical debt. And you talked about the expectation that there will be increased patient responsibility for out-of-pocket costs. And I was just wondering, so where do you see the medical debt industry moving over the next few years?
Good question, thank you. I guess several points in relation to that. I don't think we're going to see any reduction in consumers' payment responsibility. I think the employers are still going to put that burden on the patient to defray some of the costs. So we will continue to see patient responsibility grow. I think we'll see less of the true uninsured through the Affordable Care Act, but there will be higher copays and deductibles that really tax the systems of the hospitals. Hospital billing systems are not designed to handle large volumes of small claims, and I'm talking small claims less than $2,000. They're designed to really get reimbursement from third-party insurance companies. So hospitals have to find ways to efficiently process these claims, both internally as well as with their collection outsourcer. I think hospitals have to have better payment estimator systems, and I think they're getting better at that, along with insurance verification systems, so they know what the bill is and they can counsel the patient when the patient is there and not get surprised when the patient gets the bill in their home and now they get the EOB, which of course it's not a bill, but we all know what that looks like, and it's complicated. I think with 501R that was mentioned, we'll have a 120 to 240-day period whereby hospitals are going to be required to really sort out who qualifies for financial assistance. And so I think that will be certainly an improvement for the consumer. And something that ACA International has supported along with HFMA back on the credit reporting issue is that the credit report gets removed 45 days after the consumer makes that payment, which will help their FICO score, because instead of being reported as a paid, it'll be reported as removed. So I think those are some future issues. And I think what you're seeing on the collection agency side, and certainly in our organization, we're emphasizing, less for collector or patient financial counselor productivity and more on what we call our call quality. So when one of our agents has a consumer on the phone, we are randomly auditing those calls. We have 100% call recording, so every call is recorded. We audit those scores. We have about a 15-point call quality score that the collector receives, and we use it for training purposes as well as compensation for the collector. So I think it will be a much more patient-friendly process in the future.
Thank you, Tom. So
The last question that I will offer for each of our panelists, if they'd like to respond, is, what information do you believe consumers need to make more informed choices about medical debt. Tom, if you'd like, we can start with you and then just work our way around the table.
Sure, and quickly, because we've discussed a lot of this, but I think it's to really understand what's covered and what isn't, and it's an easy thing to say, because again, as I sorted through my own plan this year, it's a complicated process. So I think even question your provider, if there's a procedure that's going to be requested by your clinician to find out, what is covered and what isn't, so you can understand that right up front. So it's really for the consumer to understand what is covered and what is not covered.
Great. Yeah, so I might point out just a couple of resources that HFMA has produced in connection with healthcare dollars and cents. The first is, and we believe this is the first time we've ever published a consumer-facing publication, but it's a guide written for consumers to help them understand healthcare prices. So it has sections on if you're an insured patient, what questions do you need to be asking? If you're an uninsured patient or you're seeking out-of-network care from a provider you know is out-of-network, what questions you need to be asking. And we're working with one of our partners, the American Hospital Association, to really get this into provider settings. We're certainly working with Mark and others to get Mark Rukavina and others to get this out to the consumer audience. So it's really just there as a guide to help consumers understand what is right now a very complex process. We've also started on the provider side, launched just last November, a curriculum, an online training course for hospital and health system revenue cycle employees on patient financial communications. So you can actually be training your staff, and we're recommending, one of the recommendations is that training occurs every year for staff in the revenue cycle who are working with patients. The best practices in patient financial communications and helping them understand, again, to the extent we can do it at the point of care, understand how the system works, what their possible financial responsibilities are going to be, and the options that are out there for them to help meet those. And then just, what else do consumers need? They need individualized price information that reflects their benefit plans and their current status in meeting deductibles. I know providers and payers both are trying to work to get that coordinated so it's more available, again, at point of care. They need access to quality information as well that can help them choose high-value care. Our best practices are very consistent in the need for pairing both price information and quality and patient safety information to make these informed choices. And they need information about payment options and financial assistance. And as I said, our patient financial communications training is designed to make sure that they're getting that in the healthcare provider setting.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And Mark last night at dinner shared a story about somebody who walked into a bank or a long-term relationship and was going to refi a mortgage and found out that there was an issue because of medical collections on the bureau file, and it was impacting their FICO score. And we've heard variations of that story here today. And so FICO's been very committed to consumer education and transparency. And how can we help consumers understand the impacts of things in their bureau file before they get into a lending decision. And one of the programs that we announced and launched over a year ago is a program called Open Access, whereby we've offered to every lender in the United States who's using the FICO score that at no additional charge from FICO to offer the FICO score that they're using in risk management decisions and share that for free with the consumer, along with other educational content like the reasons why the score is what it is, a score meter that gives some context as to how the lender views the score, and a graphical historical chart of trend lines with the score. Impacts of things in the bureau file, including medical collections, can first be identified, long before a consumer needs to access the credit market, through their existing relationships with banks and others. So we're proud. The early results of this program are really very favorable. We've had several large and small organizations adopt the program and join the program, and we get feedback, and we're seeing some just fantastic things about increased consumer engagement. We're even seeing impacts on consumers who view their score on a regular basis, maybe perhaps modifying their behavior, and we're seeing impacts on increased FICO scores and even reduced delinquencies in certain cases. So it can have a strong positive impact not only on transparency and consumer empowerment, but also maybe help modify behavior that can help support and enhance the consumer credit financial system, which is good for everybody.
Great, thank you, Jim. Blake?
Well, so I agree with what we're saying about price transparency, but I just don't think that price transparency solves all of our problems. When we talk about emergency room settings, when patients have no option about who they see for care, it's not going to be possible to shop around when you are in an emergency situation. So when we talk about what information consumers need for more informed choices, we also have to talk about better protections for consumers. On the short front, I would say that consumers need to know how to contact the CFPB and put that contact information in their cell phone. Because you're going to have to fight these things. These medical debt situations are going to occur under our current system, and consumers are going to have to push back. They're going to have to complain. They're going to have to find all the opportunities they have for recourse, and we are very fortunate that we have the CFPB to help where they can.
I agree with much of what's been said thus far. And I think I want to back it up a little bit, and I think for the provider community and the collection community to help consumers avoid incurring medical debt, making sure, as was mentioned earlier, that that the insurance process is followed, that these bills are paid, that insurers pay all they're obligated to pay in terms of claims, that screening for public programs is done, and screening for providers' own financial assistance is done, and done uniformly with all patients, and that certainly doesn't exist today. I think consumers would benefit from clean and accurate bills. Once that bill is generated, there should be a high level of confidence that when a consumer gets a bill for what they're expected to pay, that all this other work has been done so that they know what it is that they owe. And then what's going to happen, the time frame in which that bill is due, and what will happen if the bill isn't paid within that time frame. So again, I think notification, as was mentioned earlier, around actions, collection actions that may be taken if the bill isn't resolved. That would be a great improvement. I think what is really needed is to eliminate the element of surprise for many consumers when they get these bills out of nowhere. But I think what would be really great is if the CFPB could really help to accelerate the adoption of some of the new scoring algorithms like FICO 9 and others that treat these medical collections differently than older versions do. I think that would be of enormous benefit to consumers across the country. So again, I thank the Bureau for looking at these issues and encourage you to keep doing so in the future.
So I think I'm in the unenviable position of going last. And I think more from prior work history and personal experience, and I'll go out on a limb and suggest maybe that is something actually Corey and I mentioned briefly to him at some point, is this idea of an ombudsperson in the medical debt collection, or in the healthcare arena, an advocate, someone who can be an independent advocate, not necessarily someone associated with the provider's financial counselor, but someone who can help navigate the complexity between the provider and the health insurance company. And this is sort of the back end to if some of the front end problems that Mark mentioned aren't resolved. But even if those are addressed, I think there still will be issues in the sort of that 800-pound elephant or gorilla in the room around sort of surprise. I think there may be surprises there still, as much as we can try to eliminate them as best as possible. And so someone who could serve as an advocate for a patient to help figure it out, because not everyone has the time or the ability to, not everyone has the knowledge of what the complexities are to figure it out. And so that kind of role could do some benefit for a number of patients.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Please join me in thanking each of our panelists for being with us today and for their thoughtful remarks. I invite our panelists now to rejoin the audience, and I'm going to turn it back over to Zixta Martinez. You're still with us, Corey? You're still here with us. Yeah, you should.
Thank you, Steve. An important part of how the Bureau helps consumer finance markets work across the U.S. is to hear directly from consumers, from industry, from our state and local partners, and from community advocates. One of the ways that the Bureau gathers public feedback is through public events such as these. We've held field hearings, town halls, and other public events in places like Indianapolis, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, Birmingham, Alabama, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Durham, North Carolina, Detroit, Atlanta, Des Moines, Iowa, Itta-Bena, Mississippi, El Paso, Texas, Phoenix, Nashville, and of course, now we can add Oklahoma City to the list, among others. At these events, we not only hear from experts in the field, and today's experts were terrific, we also invite the public to participate and share their comments. Before I open the floor for public testimony today, I want to remind folks that there are several other ways to communicate your observations, your comments, or your complaints with the CFPB. You can file a consumer complaint with the CFPB through our website at consumerfinance.gov. Our website will walk you through the process for filing a consumer complaint. If you don't have a specific complaint but would like to tell us your story, we have a feature called Tell Us Your Story, where you can tell us your story, good or bad, about your experience with consumer financial products or services. Your story will help inform the work that we do to protect consumers and create a fairer marketplace. We also have another feature called Ask CFPB, where you can find answers to over 1,000 frequently asked questions about consumer financial issues, as well as additional resources. I encourage you to visit consumerfinance.gov to learn more about the resources and tools the Bureau has developed to help consumers make the best decisions for themselves and for their family. Now it's time to hear from public participants here today. A number of you have signed up to share comments and observations about today's discussion. The open mic portion of the field hearing is also an important opportunity for the CFPB to hear about what's happening in consumer finance markets in your community. Each person who signed up to provide testimony will have about 2 minutes to do so. What we hear from you is invaluable, and we want to hear from as many of you as signed up to provide testimony today. So with that, I will call our first public participant, Mary Beth Gard. Stand here. Walt is bringing you a microphone.
Thank you. Mary Beth Gard with bankersonline.com. I have a number of remarks. I'll put what doesn't fit in 2 minutes into writing. I'm very intrigued with the idea of the reporting of accuracy, and is the database of the reports going to be something publicly accessible to lenders, for example? And if so, do you anticipate a possible amendment to Appendix Q to Reg Z so that if a lender is making a loan that they hope to qualify as a qualified mortgage under 1026.43E2, that they have to underwrite under Appendix Q, that they will be able to treat medical debt differently if it has been reported by a furnisher with a poor record of accuracy in reporting? Something to think about.
It is something to think about. We have to go back and talk to our experts and review the language and make sure we'll get back to you. Thank you, Mary Beth. Our next public participant is Steele Rose.
Hi, I'm Steele Rose. I'm with Collection Advisor Magazine. The point I was going to make, I thought would be a question and answer, but many of our readers of the magazine are very small collection agencies, and they would like to see a set of rules that they could abide by so that they know how to practice rather than set up a lot of things that sometimes they can't necessarily afford if it's not something that's necessary. So if they had a set of rules to go by, then they could comply without being potentially driven out of business. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Tina Pollard.
I'm I'm Tina Pollard. I work for the Citizen Potawatomi Community Development Corporation. I'm also here representing the Native Assets Coalition. And most people believe that Native American tribal members receive free health care, which is simply not the case. It's not a given. First, the insurance company is billed, then the Indian Health Services, and then the member is responsible for the balance. And the level of education, the level of trust, and a lot of our members are unbanked, which makes it even a harder issue for them to make the payments. So I would hope that you would think about those constituents as well when you're making your decisions.
Thank you, Ms. Pollard. Kent Carter. Kent Carter. Bernard Allen Bay.
Oh, thank you. I'm Bernard Allen Bay. I'd like to congratulate the director on the Senate confirmation as the nation's first director. And we're excited about the Bureau, and at the NAACP, the national office is, encourage you to continue to build your staff and tour the country and hear what the people have to say, and then to build in a model, if possible, to make sure that once you iron out what's fair, that it's applied equally across the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Allen Bay. Kate Ritchie. Monica Eason.
Hi, Monica Eason with Communications Workers of America. Kind of nervous, didn't realize I was going to actually say something, but my main thing is that I want to make sure that it's consumer-based. I heard a lot of FICO and collection stuff, but my concern, being a labor union, my concern is with the consumer itself. I want to make sure that we do focus on helping the consumer versus the corporation in this issue. We've had many members actually come to us about legal, or not legal, but medical stuff, asking for our help, and we help where we can. Although it's not our realm, we do try to help where we can. And we actually had somebody recently say that they had something reported that they had paid for and got sold to another company to collect on the other portion of the debt. So that's one of my concerns, is that, again, that the consumer is truly the one that's going to benefit out of this versus the corporations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eason. Garland Pruitt. Kent Carter. No on Monica Eason? Okay. Kate Ritchie, Garland Pruitt. Okay. That concludes the public portion of today's field hearing. I want to thank everyone who provided thoughtful comments. I want to thank the members of the public who took time from their busy days to visit with us. I want to thank the panel of experts and to all those watching via live stream at consumerfinance.gov. Thank you, of course, to Oklahoma City University for hosting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That concludes the CFPB's field hearing in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.